All right, good morning, class. This lecture is about the cabinet and the presidential advisors that created by George Washington. It goes along with the beginnings of the Washington administration and some of the challenges he faced and how they overcame. Also plays into the role of the development of political parties, which is one of our essential questions for this unit. So first, understanding what is the cabinet. So the cabinet is actually not part of the Constitution. It was created through the Elastic Clause and the idea of implied powers, that the government could do things beyond what's stated in the Constitution. George Washington felt that he needed a set of executive officials to serve an advisory role and also a managing role while he was president of the United States. He didn't feel that he and a vice president could fulfill all the duties of the office well. So he suggested that there be a few additional people added to the executive department to help physically run the country. So the three original cabinet positions were the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of War. And we're going to talk about what each one of those departments mean and the original people that filled them. So the Secretary of the Treasury oversees the Treasury Department, which is essentially the financial side of the United States government. Supposed to advise on finance and then actually conduct finance and run the financial side of the United States. The first Secretary of the Treasury was Mr. Alexander Hamilton, which we'll learn a lot about Alexander Hamilton with his financial plan. Hamilton was a banker by trade, and he was a brilliant financial mind. And he was also a general, colonel or general in the American Revolution, served with Washington. So Washington knew him, he trusted him, knew he was very good with money and finances. So that's why he suggested him as Secretary of the Treasury. His goal as Secretary of Treasury was to create a stable economy for the United States. The U.S. had some very serious problems with debt, had some very serious problems trying to create a stable currency, and then also develop industry and develop their economy now that they were separate from Great Britain. So Hamilton's job was to try to figure out some ways to do that and then execute them and actually oversee them. Secretary of the State, this one sometimes is confusing to students because we think about, the states, and sometimes people think that the Secretary of the State oversees the relationship with the states, but that's not actually what they do. The Secretary of the State actually oversees U.S. ambassadors and deals with foreign countries. So the Secretary of State deals with foreign states, so places like France and England and Spain. That's where this particular secretary does their job. So oversees all the U.S. ambassadors and is supposed to advise and create foreign policy. So in this case, George Washington chose Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had been one of our ambassadors to France. He took over for Benjamin Franklin after Franklin left. And Jefferson was very well versed on European political policy. He had a very good relationship with the government of France and a good enough relationship with the government of England, but particularly to understand what was going on. He had lived in Europe for about 7 years, lived in France for about 7 years, so he understood the political climate, and that's why Washington chose him. Jefferson was also from Virginia. Washington was also from Virginia, so they served a lot together in state matters. But Jefferson's goal was to create stable relationships with European nations, which the United States desperately needed. And as we'll look forward to that, sometimes Jefferson's opinions on what the United States should do led to some conflict within Washington's cabinet. And then finally, we have the Secretary of War, Mr. Henry Knox. There's a very famous fort named after him in Kentucky. The Secretary of War oversees the military and provides advice on defense of the nation. So where the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, he can't necessarily oversee the day-to-day operations of the military and all those sorts of things. So that's where the Secretary of War steps in. And also, be up to date on the current workings of the Army and foreign armies and those sorts of things. So the goal of Henry Knox as Secretary of War was to create an army and a navy that could defend the United States. And second, most importantly, what you'll read a little bit about today, is deal with Native Americans. Native Americans are actually the biggest foreign, if you will, threat to the United States following the American Revolution. And many of the early dealings of the Army and the first battles and wars the United States fought were actually against Native Americans in the Northwest Territory. So the cabinet overall, they are appointed by the president and they have to be approved by the Senate. So the president doesn't just get whoever he wants, though most of the time the Senate will approve presidential appointments unless there's something very, very, very wrong with that person. They have a very suspect background, or they maybe are very, very unqualified for the position. But most of the time the president gets them. Secretaries of these departments, they have no defined term of office. Many of them resign after a period of time and go work in another part of government, or run for an office. And many of them, just resign and go work in private industry and do their private business. Some secretaries serve for more than one president. Sometimes a president will come into office and they will keep around a Secretary of Defense or a Secretary of State from a previous administration to keep some continuity within the executive department. And the cabinet is actually part of the line of succession now. So when we think about, if the president should die, who becomes president, they've worked the cabinet positions into that since they are part of the executive department. So the current line of succession now, just for fun to know this, is the president, then the vice president, then the Speaker of the House, who is an elected official. And then after that, it's the Secretary of State. So a lot of people see the Secretary of State as kind of one of the more prestigious, probably the most prestigious cabinet position, simply because you are the representative of the United States around the world. You represent the interests of the U.S. And then, of course, you are fourth in line to be president. So, little college team challenge. Can you find who the current or proposed cabinet positions are in these three places: Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, and Secretary of Defense? Make sure you're using the most up-to-date information. Whitehouse.gov is a great place to go to look for those. Let's see if you can figure them out, and you can either let me know in class or shoot me an email.